So, you
Mm.
need to uncover what their pain points are and what's the emotional need. But by leading questions, you can ask them questions about their business that give you permission to talk about, hey, we can do this, we can solve this.
Yeah.
And then investigative questions are those questions where you don't know the answer to them, but if you have that information, it could help you. And then empathy questions are the questions which allow you to connect with them at an emotional level. And then instigating questions are ones that I always tell people to use them cautiously, but if you can ask instigating questions that maybe strike a nerve, it's like,
What do you
I
mean by
can't believe,
instigating questions?
for example, it's like you could ask somebody, I can't believe that situation happened with that vendor. How did that make you feel when they screwed up that job? So that might be a question that's a little sensitive. It
Yeah.
might be a little bit of a hot button. However, if you get them talking, now all of a sudden it's okay. Um, this guy understands my business, and maybe he's even got solutions. I had an example of a situation like that where somebody had a vendor make a mistake, and I asked a pretty pointed question. I said, "Man, how did that make you feel?" And the guy goes, "We were mad. We were really upset, and quite frankly, it cost us a lot of money." And I said, you know what's interesting is my team had that same thing happen a couple of years ago, and we put a solution in place to make sure that could never happen again. He goes, "Okay, tell me more." So now all of a sudden, I took something that was a sensitive subject, got him to open up, and I had a solution which made him feel like I was going to take care of him. Very powerful.
Yeah. But you do
So
have
those
to be
four question types
mindful.
drive
Yeah.
everything.
You have to be mindful of that type of question
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
audience, to who you're talking to. But yeah, it's a really powerful story that you're going to get from them, which then you
Yeah.
can, as you say, you found a solution for that situation. So I
Yeah,
think,
Mark, you brought up a great point. You do have to be careful. And quite frankly, sometimes the first conversation isn't when you dive into some of these things. However, if you are bold and you ask questions that are questions nobody else would ask,
mm,
and you don't make them feel like embarrassed or ashamed or upset, it can open up a golden opportunity
yeah,
to be a resource in ways that another vendor or supplier could not.
yeah, absolutely. Who would you say your ideal client for Askology is? If people are coming to you and you're like, what is the target person that you're trying to
Yeah.
talk to? Small businesses, is that right?
Well, let me step back and tell you where this really started. So in 2009, when I launched my first company, it was a sales coaching and consulting agency, and I was working with small business owners that had teams, sales teams, and I was coming in and coaching their sales teams. In some situation, I was a virtual manager. I managed a team out of Nashville, Tennessee for 2 years. And a lot of the methodologies, a lot of the things I created from Askology method. Now, the four questions are the foundation, but those four questions drive everything: negotiation, networking, you name it. And so originally it was designed for companies that had small sales teams that needed guidance. But because of the work I do with Boss Academy and the radio show and everything, I'm passionate about serving small business leaders directly that maybe don't have the resources, maybe they don't have a team. So it's solopreneurs, coaches, consultants, business leaders that are out there having direct conversations or who I have targeted Askology for. However, every bit of that content would still apply to a small sales team.
Yeah. So we've got on the show lots of business owners, entrepreneurs that are listening to this, and some of them might be founder-led sales team. That the founder might be still doing sales calls. Just really delve into the difference between a salesperson who's trying to convince you that you should buy this service versus asking really great questions that can reveal other things that can help you be able to close that sale.
When I was managing sales teams, I always looked for salespeople that were empathetic. The idea of always be closing is a very important piece of the sales process. However, the teachings of the 60s and 70s, the always be closing hardcore
Mm,
tactics have done a lot of damage and they've pushed people away. A lot of times you go into, no offense to car dealerships, but because car dealerships can be one of the greatest training grounds. However,
Mm.
some people are really aggressive. So when I was hiring sales teams, I always wanted somebody that could put themselves in the shoes of the person on the other side of the table. Because if all buying decisions take place at an emotional level, which they do, why wouldn't you want somebody that can relate to, okay, this person's facing, this is why they're staying up at night. This is what's preventing them from scaling their business. So finding people that are empathetic. But over time, I think there's another piece of it, Mark. And I think that I started to figure out, why does this work for me? Why has this been something I've been able to embrace? And I've always been a curious person. There's a fine line between curiosity and nosy, right? But I'm curious. I like to get to know stuff about people. I retain that stuff and I can recall it later. So I would encourage anybody out there that wants to embrace something like Askology, what makes them better than the guy who's out there pushing a message, be curious. Then it's natural, right? You want to know things. Now, sometimes you can overdo it. You can ask too many questions, fair enough. But if it's coming from a genuine place of curiosity and empathy, you've got something. You don't have to be an empathetic person to think empathetically. As a friend of mine says, he's not empathetic, he's sympathetic. However, an understanding of the fact that you might be facing some sort of challenge in your business that I can address. If I truly believe in what I'm selling, and I believe that I'm selling it that for the betterment of my clients, why wouldn't I want to understand what your needs are? Because then maybe I can offer a solution that's going to help you. Then
Yeah,
we
and
both win.
it's solving problems. Like sales is
Right.
essentially if you can find a problem that your service business can solve, then you're going to get the close. You don't have
Yeah.
to push it on them.
Right.
They must buy this. It's more actually in a conversation if you can solve that problem, which is what's troubling them. But a lot of people, the traditional sales and like sort of 80s, 90s, early as well, was all about trying to convince people that they need the service rather than, in a way, elegantly getting to the conclusion that they get to the conclusion why they need your product or service rather than trying to push it on them.
Yeah. And there's a real problem that's, I think, a genuine problem that most of us fall in love with our own brands. We fall in love with what we have to say, what we have to offer. We have internal conversations. We get excited about our products. We get in front of somebody and we start talking about the features and benefits. And it's, oh, this can do this for you. And this has this feature. But the person that we're talking to often is sitting there going, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll this week. I don't know what I'm going to do with that tax bill that's late. And they're sitting there dealing with emotional stresses, and we're talking about features and benefits, and there's often a disconnect. Now, that doesn't mean you don't talk about what your tools can do, but wouldn't it be better to uncover what the person's needs are
Mm.
and then talk about how those fit into a solution for them? And that's the missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. An area which you don't talk very much about, I've not seen you talk much about, is Evertreen and what you're doing with them. So why don't you share with my audience what you're doing with them?
Well, I appreciate that. So it's really interesting because we all, if you're on LinkedIn, you get solicited a lot. You get a lot of messages that are very, I guess, we'll just say jumping right into the sale. And
Yeah,
I ignore a lot of them, delete a lot of them, sometimes don't respond to them. One day I got a message from this young lady in the UK, and she started talking about this organization, Evertreen. And I was like just instantly drawn to her message. And it was a company that they plant trees around the world and they are making an impact. It's nice to have trees planted, but you don't really realize the impact that tree being planted has on the people who are planting it, the farmers, the communities. And so I was intrigued by it and I thought, gosh, this is a really neat organization. And then she introduced me to one of the founders and one of the people on the team that directly works with the founder. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what I need at Boss Academy, a way for us to give back and make an impact. And so I started talking to them about the work they're doing around the world. And they work with some pretty large contributors. So we would be on the smaller side of it, but they loved our mission. And so I brought Evertreen to Boss Academy. So now when somebody joins as a new member, we plant trees in their name. We have speakers that come in, we plant trees in their name. And so every month we're contributing to Evertreen, buying trees, and then we have our own little farm in Madagascar where we're helping the farmers there and helping the farmers impact their community. And they don't just plant the trees, but they're planting fruit bearing trees. They get to collect the fruit, sell the fruit. And so it's making a financial impact, but also a great environmental impact. I'm not an environmentalist, but I just loved their mission and I loved their approach. And it's been really neat to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it's something I think you should talk more about. The fact that you're doing that,
Yeah.
it should be something that you should be sharing
Thank
with
you.
a wider audience because it's a fantastic thing that you do.
I appreciate that. And maybe I'm not smart enough to figure out how to talk about it in the right way because it's our way of giving back. I guess we should share it more, but it's one of those things where I don't want it to be a best kept secret, but I also don't want it to overshadow all the other great things we're doing. So I'm always trying to find that fine balance. But I appreciate you bringing that up. It makes me think that I do need to talk about it more.
Yeah.
And if you go to bossacademy.com/Evertreen, EVERTREEN, you can see a page that's dedicated to our contributions there because it is an important part of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Who, when you're in your teenage years, inspired you?
That's a really interesting one. I told you I grew up in a really small environment, a small community, but I had an uncle who was probably the reason that I'm in business for myself today. He owned a farm and ranch supply company. Prior to that, he'd owned a jewelry store, and he was in a lot of different businesses. Just one of the most dynamic people I've ever met. He walked into a room. He was one of those people who was just kind of people were magnetically drawn to him. He was a great storyteller. He never forgot a name. If he met you once, he was going to remember you. And we'd go visit him. He lived in Colorado in a city about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours away from us. So we didn't get to see him that much. But when we saw him, we'd go out to breakfast or somewhere and he would remember the wait staff, the people working there. I was just always blown away at his ability to capture attention through storytelling.
Mm.
But also this idea of being a business owner just seemed so exciting. So I would say that I was inspired by him then, and even though he's been long gone, I still to this day think about him. And I've tried to become a better storyteller, and I've tried to model a lot of things that he did well
Mm.
because it was impressive to see how he left people feeling better than when he met them. And that's something I always strive to do.